Have you felt it lately? That strange kind of exhaustion that isn't really about your body, but about your mind. The constant noise, the constant decisions, the constant feeling that life is asking you to be everywhere at once, and somehow still be calm, focused, disciplined, and on top of it. Because that's the modern condition for a lot of people. You wake up and you're already behind. Not because you did something wrong, but because the world is loud and your attention is being pulled in 10 directions before you even fully become yourself for the day. And in that kind of environment, you start craving complexity. You start believing you need a new system, a new plan, a new secret, a new breakthrough just to feel stable again. But here's the truth I want to offer you at the start of this episode. The thing most people don't want to hear because it sounds too simple. The life you want in 2026 probably won't come from a dramatic reinvention. It will come from quiet habits you can repeat when you're tired, from small disciplines that don't need motivation, from choices so simple they almost feel boring, and that's exactly why they work. That's where Stoicism becomes something real, not a philosophy class, not ancient quotes for Instagram, a practical operating system for your mind, a way to move through pressure without breaking, a way to stay steady in a world that benefits when you're scattered. And the reason it has survived for centuries, from Epictetus teaching in Nicopolis to Marcus Aurelius writing to himself on campaign near the Danube frontier in the 2nd century, is because it doesn't ask you to become superhuman. It asks you to become consistent. And I'm going to make you a promise right now. What we're doing in this episode is not complicated. It's not trendy. It's not designed to impress anyone. These are 10 simple Stoic habits that can quietly transform you across a year. If you treat them as non-negotiable, the way you treat brushing your teeth, the way you treat getting dressed, the way you treat showing up for work, even when you don't feel like it. Think of 2026 not as a year where you loudly announce a new identity, but as a year where you become someone different in silence, where your thinking gets cleaner, your reactions get slower, your self-respect gets stronger, and your life starts to follow that inner order, almost inevitably, because the outside always catches up to the inside. So as you listen, don't try to grab all 10 habits like a desperate person grabbing tools in the dark. Just listen for the one that makes you uncomfortable, the one that you resist a little, the one your mind wants to argue with, because that one is probably the doorway. And by the end, you won't need a new personality. You'll just need one habit you'll actually keep when the day tries to pull you back into the old you. Habit 1. Control the first thought. Have you ever noticed how fast your mind writes a story before you even realize you picked up the pen? Something happens. Someone looks at you a certain way. A message comes in late. You wake up with a heavy feeling. You hear one sentence that hits your ego, and instantly your brain offers you an interpretation like it's doing you a favor. They don't respect me. This is going to be a bad day. I'm behind. I'm not enough. And the scary part is not that the thought appears. The scary part is how quickly we treat it like truth. The Stoics were obsessed with this moment because they understood something most people never train. Your first thought is often not you. It's the automatic reflex. It's the old program. It's the nervous system trying to protect you. And if you let that first thought become your verdict, your whole day becomes a reaction to an assumption. Epictetus called these first impressions appearances. They show up uninvited, and his point was simple and ruthless. You don't control what appears, but you do control what you accept. You can let the thought enter without letting it sit on the throne. This habit is about one skill, separating the automatic reaction from the conscious judgment. You stop living as if your first interpretation is the only interpretation. You build a pause, small, almost invisible, where you ask, is this true, or is this just my mind trying to feel safe? Marcus Aurelius practiced this like a daily discipline because as emperor, a single unexamined impression could turn into cruelty, paranoia, or ego. So he trained himself to slow down the meaning-making, to see the event, then choose the meaning. Because perception shapes experience, not as a motivational phrase, literally. Your frame becomes your mood becomes your behavior becomes your life. So here's what controlling the first thought looks like in real life. You wake up and your brain says, "Today is going to be exhausting." Instead of arguing, you pause and translate it into something cleaner. "I feel tired." That's not a prophecy. You receive criticism and your mind says, "They're attacking me." You pause and reframe. "This is feedback. I can keep my dignity while I listen." Someone doesn't reply and your mind says, "I'm not important." You pause and correct. "I don't know their situation. I'm not going to create pain from guessing." Notice what we're doing. We're not pretending. We're not forcing optimism. We're removing distortion. Because distortion is what steals clarity. And you don't need a long meditation session for this. You need a micro pause, a single breath, a small internal checkpoint. Epictetus would suggest you speak to the impression like you're stopping someone at the door. "Hold on. Let me see who you are." That's the habit. You don't slam the door on the thought. You don't let it run the house either. Here's a practical way to install this habit without drama. Choose one phrase you will use as a mental break. Something simple enough to survive stress. Not a speech, just a switch. It could be, "That's an impression," or "Check the story," or "Facts first." The exact words don't matter. What matters is that you use the phrase to create space before you interpret. And once you create that space, ask one question: what are the facts I actually know? Because facts calm the mind. Facts shrink fear. Facts expose exaggeration. Most anxiety is a story running ahead of evidence. Most anger is a meaning you assigned too quickly. Facts bring you back. Then you choose your judgment. Not the first one, the best one, and this is where the transformation starts to feel real. Because when you control the first thought, you control the first domino. You stop giving your mornings away to mood. You stop handing your peace to other people's behavior. You stop letting old wounds write today's decisions. You begin to live from intention. And as soon as you do that, the next habit becomes almost obvious. Because once you stop letting the first thought run your day, you need something else to guide the day instead. Not a long to-do list, not chaotic urgency, but one clear intention that keeps you aligned even when the day gets messy. Habit 2. Start every day with one clear intention. Have you ever made it to the end of a day and felt busy, even exhausted, but also strangely empty, like you spent 12 hours moving and still didn't truly choose where your life went? That's what happens when your day is run by momentum instead of intention, because momentum will always find something to feed on. Messages, small fires, other people's urgency, your own anxiety, your own appetite for distraction. And when you don't give your mind a clear aim early, it will accept whatever aim the world hands it by default. This is why the Stoics treated the morning like sacred territory, not in a mystical way, but in a practical way, because the first hours decide the tone of your judgments, and your judgments decide the quality of your choices. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself about the resistance we feel when we wake up, that tug to stay in comfort, and he answered it with something like a blunt reminder. You were made to do the work of a human being, not to hide from life under warm blankets. That isn't about hustle. It's about identity. It's about waking up and remembering who you are before the day tells you who to be. Now here's the part most people get wrong, and it's the reason they stay overwhelmed. They try to fix chaos with more complexity. They wake up, they open their notes app, they write a long to-do list, they stack goals on goals, they try to become a machine, and by noon they feel defeated because the list becomes a silent judge that follows them around, whispering, "You're behind." And then they start bargaining, they start chasing easy wins. They start doing small tasks to feel productive, even if those tasks don't move their life forward. Stoicism offers something far simpler, and that simplicity is the strength. One clear intention, not 10 priorities, not a life plan at 7 a.m. One intention that acts like a compass, one sentence that tells your mind, "This is what matters today," because when your mind knows what matters, it becomes harder to hijack. Epictetus had a line that captures this spirit. First decide what kind of person you want to be, and then do what that person would do. That's the architecture of intention. You're not waking up and asking, "What do I feel like?" You're waking up and choosing a direction, and the direction becomes your anchor when emotions shift later, because emotions will shift. And if your day depends on mood, you will live at the mercy of weather. So what does a clear intention actually look like? It's not vague. Be better doesn't help you when you're stressed. Have a good day doesn't guide action. A Stoic intention is concrete and value-based, and it fits inside one breath. It might be, "Today I practice patience," or "Today I do the hard thing first," or "Today I speak with honesty and restraint," or "Today I protect my focus," or "Today I act with dignity even if I'm tired." You're not trying to control the whole day. You're choosing the standard you want to live by inside the day. And here's the quiet genius. One intention doesn't narrow your life. It clarifies it. It gives you a filter. When a message comes in, you ask, "Does answering this right now support my intention?" When an impulse shows up, you ask, "Does this move me toward my intention?" When a person provokes you, you ask, "What does my intention ask of me here?" Suddenly you're not improvising your character in real time. You're practicing it. Seneca warned about how life is long enough if you don't waste it, and part of waste is not just time, it's attention scattered across trivial things, so a single intention is a way of reclaiming your attention before it gets spent like loose change. It's you deciding you won't be mentally available to everything, because being available to everything means being devoted to nothing. Now, let's make this practical in a way you can actually live with, because the world will test this habit within minutes. The first test is the phone. The phone is not neutral. It is a machine that specializes in stealing intentions. The moment you open it, you invite other people's priorities into your morning. News, opinions, drama, requests, comparison. The subtle pressure to respond, the subtle feeling that you're already late, already behind, already failing. So if you want one clear intention, you need one small boundary. Don't let the world speak first. Let your intention speak first. Even if it's 30 seconds, even if it's one breath while the coffee is brewing, you give yourself the first word. The second test is your own mind, because your mind will try to turn intention into perfection. It will say, "If I choose a priority, I must finish everything." No, this is not a contract for flawless performance. This is a compass. A compass doesn't guarantee smooth roads. It simply keeps you from walking in circles. So here's a simple way to choose your intention that avoids overthinking. Ask, what is the one thing that, if I did it today, would make me respect myself tonight? That question cuts through noise. It doesn't ask what would impress people. It asks what would build self-trust. And self-trust is where discipline grows. Then add the Stoic layer. Connect that one thing to a value. If the one thing is a difficult conversation, the value might be courage. If the one thing is deep work, the value might be focus and integrity. If the one thing is exercise, the value might be self-respect. If the one thing is saying no, the value might be boundaries and honesty. Now your intention isn't just a task, it's character training. And here's the part that makes this habit transform you over a year. The intention becomes the way you return, because you will drift. Everyone drifts. You'll get pulled into small distractions. You'll get emotionally triggered. You'll lose an hour to something pointless. You'll have moments where you don't recognize yourself. The difference in 2026 is not that you never drift. The difference is how fast you come back. So build a simple return rule. If you notice you're drifting, then you return to your intention in the smallest possible way. Not with guilt, not with self-attack, with calm correction. If your intention was patience and you snapped, you return by softening your next sentence. If your intention was focus and you got distracted, you return by doing 10 minutes of clean work. If your intention was courage and you avoided, you return by taking one small step toward the thing you're resisting. This is how the habit compounds. You stop demanding perfect days and start building reliable direction. And over time, something subtle changes. Your days stop feeling like accidental storms you survive. They start feeling like chosen training sessions. You become less dramatic, less reactive, less easily pulled into other people's urgency, because you wake up with an inner mission that doesn't need applause. Marcus Aurelius once wrote a reminder to himself that tranquility comes from doing less, but doing what matters, doing what is essential. That is the spirit of this habit. One clear intention is not a productivity hack. It is a way of living with fewer inner contradictions, a way of making decisions that match your values, not your impulses. So tomorrow morning, before the world touches you, choose one intention that makes you proud. Not loudly, not for show, but quietly, like a man placing his hand back on the wheel. And once you can do that, once you can aim your day with one sentence, the next habit becomes a natural progression, because now you're ready to train something deeper than planning. You're ready to train discomfort itself, on purpose, in small daily doses, until your discipline stops depending on comfort at all. Habit 3. Voluntary discomfort. Daily, small. Have you ever noticed how the moment life gets slightly uncomfortable, your mind starts negotiating like a lawyer, suddenly creative, suddenly persuasive, suddenly full of reasonable excuses? And if you're honest, you can feel how quickly that negotiation turns into a pattern, and that pattern quietly becomes a personality. This is one of the deepest Stoic insights you can bring into 2026. Discipline is not built by waiting for comfort. Discipline is built by practicing discomfort on purpose, in small, controllable doses, until your nervous system stops treating discomfort like an emergency. The Stoics didn't call it voluntary discomfort to sound tough. They practiced it because they understood the human mind is easily domesticated by ease. If you always obey comfort, comfort becomes your master. If you always avoid discomfort, discomfort becomes your fear. And when discomfort becomes your fear, you don't just avoid pain, you avoid growth, you avoid truth. You avoid hard conversations. You avoid the work that would change your life. Epictetus was blunt about this. He taught that you don't become strong by reading about strength. You become strong by training your capacity to choose the right action, even when your body wants the easier one. That's the heart of Stoicism. Not suppressing emotion, but refusing to let impulse rule your decisions. It's the difference between being alive and being driven. And what's beautiful here is how small it can be. Most people think discomfort training has to be dramatic, ice baths, extreme workouts, harsh routines. But the Stoics were not chasing aesthetics. They were chasing freedom. The goal is not suffering. The goal is self-command. The goal is to look at your own impulses and say calmly, I hear you, and I'm still choosing. Seneca wrote about practicing poverty at times, living simply, eating modestly, reminding himself that he could endure less. Not because he wanted to live miserably, but because he wanted to remove fear. He didn't want his happiness held hostage by external comfort. He wanted to know, in his bones, that if life took something away, he would still be himself. That's what voluntary discomfort gives you, the quiet confidence that you can handle life. So let's bring this down to reality, the everyday kind. The discomfort that actually changes you isn't heroic. It's the discomfort you usually avoid without thinking. It's getting out of bed when you said you would, even when your body argues. It's doing the first 10 minutes of work without checking messages. It's eating one simple meal instead of chasing dopamine. It's taking a walk when you'd rather disappear into the couch. It's making the call you've been postponing. It's telling the truth without dressing it up. It's staying silent when your ego wants to win. It's letting a text sit unanswered for a moment so you respond from intention, not from anxiety. It's stopping yourself mid-scroll and feeling the little ache of boredom instead of running from it. That boredom, people don't realize this, is one of the most powerful forms of voluntary discomfort in modern life. Because boredom is where your mind starts to show you what it's been avoiding. You sit in silence for even a minute and suddenly you feel restlessness, unease, old regrets, unresolved emotions, the rawness you've been numbing with noise. Most people call that, "I can't focus." But often it's simply, "I can't sit with myself yet." Voluntary discomfort trains that. It trains your ability to stay present without needing immediate relief. And this is where the habit becomes transformative over a year. You stop treating discomfort as a stop sign. You start treating it as a compass. Not always. Some discomfort is a warning, like pain that signals injury or a boundary being violated. But much of the discomfort you run from is simply the sensation of growth. It's your system adapting. It's your identity resisting change. So the practice is simple. Choose one mild discomfort daily and make it a ritual. The way you make coffee, the way you lock your door, the way you tie your shoes. You decide in advance what it will be. Because if you decide in the moment, your mind will negotiate, and your negotiating mind is not interested in your transformation. Imagine waking up and already knowing, today I do one hard thing on purpose. And the hard thing is small enough that you will actually do it. This matters. If the discomfort is too big, you'll avoid it and reinforce failure. But if it's small and consistent, it becomes identity. It becomes, I am the kind of person who does what I said I would do. Marcus Aurelius lived with the kind of pressure that would make most people crumble, and you can feel in his writing how much he valued this ability to endure small frictions without complaint, to do what needed to be done without drama. He wasn't trying to be a stone. He was trying to be reliable, and reliability is built through daily resistance training against impulse. Now here's the psychological secret. Voluntary discomfort builds self-trust faster than almost anything else. Because every time you choose the uncomfortable action, you send your mind a message, I'm in charge. And every time you avoid, you send the opposite message, my impulses run me. You don't need to say those sentences consciously. Your nervous system learns them through repetition. That's why people who constantly avoid discomfort often feel anxious and uncertain. They've taught themselves through 1,000 small choices that they can't be trusted under pressure. And people who practice discomfort, even lightly, start to feel calm strength because they've taught themselves the opposite. This is also why voluntary discomfort changes decision-making. When you practice choosing discomfort, you stop fearing the consequences of decisions as much. You're no longer obsessed with certainty. You're no longer trying to guarantee comfort. You're willing to act. And once you're willing to act, clarity increases, because clarity is not the absence of risk. It's the presence of courage. So what should the daily discomfort be? Pick something that targets your biggest weakness, but keep it humane. If your weakness is distraction, the discomfort is silence. 10 minutes of focused work before any input. If your weakness is avoidance, the discomfort is directness. One honest message you've been postponing. If your weakness is indulgence, the discomfort is restraint. A simple meal, a delayed craving, a walk instead of a dopamine hit. If your weakness is ego, the discomfort is humility. Listening fully without interrupting. Letting someone else be right without defending. If your weakness is emotional reactivity, the discomfort is the pause. Feeling the heat of anger and not feeding it with words. And there's an if. Then, that makes this habit almost automatic. If you feel resistance, then you reduce the task until it's doable, and you do it immediately. Resistance is the moment your identity is being negotiated. Don't debate it for 20 minutes. Shrink it and act. If you can't do 30 minutes, do 5. If you can't write a page, write 2 sentences. If you can't work out, walk for 10 minutes. You're not training outcomes. You're training obedience to your chosen standard. And there's another layer that matters. You practice discomfort without hatred. Some people take discipline and turn it into self-violence. That's not stoicism. That's insecurity wearing armor. Stoicism is firm, but not cruel. Voluntary discomfort is not about proving you're tough. It's about proving you're free. It's about becoming someone who can keep their word without needing perfect feelings. So you do it with calmness. You do it with a steady breath. You do it as an act of respect for your future self. You do it as a small daily ritual of self-governance. And when you live like this for a while, you start noticing something quiet and powerful. Your fears shrink. Not because life gets easier, but because your relationship with difficulty changes. You stop treating difficulty as an enemy. You treat it as training. You stop fearing the discomfort of starting. You stop fearing the discomfort of saying no. You stop fearing the discomfort of being misunderstood. And suddenly, the decisions you use to delay become cleaner. And here's the natural transition, because this habit creates a new problem in a good way. Once you're willing to face discomfort, you start seeing how much of your discomfort was created by noise, by constant input, by too many opinions, too many feeds, too many voices in your head that aren't even yours. So the next habit is about reducing input to increase clarity, because a disciplined mind still needs clean space to think. And in 2026, silence might be your most strategic advantage. Habit 4. Reduce input to increase clarity. Have you ever tried to make a big decision while your mind was already full, like you were trying to see through a fog you kept creating every hour, and you could feel the truth somewhere underneath, but you couldn't reach it because there were too many voices talking at once? That's not a character flaw, that's an input problem. In 2026, most people aren't lacking intelligence. They're drowning in information, news, opinions, podcasts, posts, arguments, productivity hacks, hot takes, endless advice, so much help that the mind becomes noisy. And a noisy mind can't think clearly. It can only react. It can only chase the next stimulus. It can only oscillate between anxiety and numbness. Stoicism offers a radical correction that sounds almost too simple. Guard your attention like your life depends on it, because in a way, it does. Your attention is the gate to your mind, and whatever you feed your mind becomes the raw material of your thoughts, your emotions, your choices, and eventually your identity. Marcus Aurelius understood this long before modern distractions existed. He wrote about keeping the mind free from unnecessary disturbance, about not letting your inner space become a marketplace where anyone can shout and sell you fear. He was an emperor surrounded by noise, political noise, social noise, military noise, and still his practice was to return to stillness, to simplicity, to the essential. He didn't do that because he was fragile. He did it because he knew the cost of mental clutter. And Seneca, maybe more than any Stoic, spoke about the danger of being scattered. He warned about being everywhere, about tasting many things, but digesting nothing. He understood that constant exposure to new inputs can feel like growth while actually weakening the mind, because growth requires assimilation. It requires digestion, and digestion requires silence. Here's the mistake most people make. They assume more input equals better decisions. They think, if I just read more, listen more, research more, I'll finally be sure. But the mind doesn't become clear by accumulating. It becomes clear by subtracting. It becomes clear when you remove what is non-essential until the essential becomes visible. And this is where Stoicism feels like a practical operating system. It doesn't ask you to become ignorant. It asks you to become selective. It asks you to stop letting random information decide your emotional state. It asks you to stop treating every headline, every opinion, every trend as something you must process. Because every input has a cost. Every input occupies mental bandwidth. Every input shapes mood. Every input creates a frame. Every input introduces a new comparison, a new fear, a new desire, a new urgency. And if you don't choose your inputs, you will wake up and spend the day reacting to other people's priorities. So let's name the real enemy here. Not information, but overload. Overload turns wisdom into confusion. It makes you second guess. It makes you anxious. It makes you indecisive. It makes you feel like you're always missing something. And that feeling, I'm missing something, is exactly what the modern attention economy sells. It wants you restless. It wants you searching. It wants you consuming. Because a content-fed mind is profitable, but a clear mind is dangerous to that system. A clear mind buys less, reacts less, panics less, scrolls less, argues less. And most importantly, a clear mind makes decisions based on values, not on whatever is trending. That's why reducing input is not just self-help, it's sovereignty. So, what does this habit look like in daily life? In a way you can actually maintain. It starts with one principle. Stop letting your day begin with other people's noise, because the first hour sets the baseline. If you start your morning by opening your phone and consuming a flood of content, you've already surrendered your attention before you've even chosen your intention. You've already allowed the world to decide what you should care about. That creates a subtle internal chaos that follows you all day. And you wonder why you can't focus, why you feel mentally tired, why you can't decide. It's because you started your day with a crowded mind. So one simple rule can change everything. No input before you produce something. Produce could mean a few minutes of thinking, a journal line, a workout, a walk, a prayer, a plan, deep work, anything that says, I moved my life forward before I consumed someone else's life. This one rule flips the power dynamic. It makes you the author of your day instead of the audience of your day. Then you take the next step. You create input boundaries. Not extreme, not dramatic, clean. Think of your mind like a room. You wouldn't invite 10 strangers in to shout at you while you try to make a decision. But that's exactly what you do when you scroll through endless opinions, endless advice, endless outrage. So you choose who gets access. Maybe you limit news to once per day at a specific time. Maybe you unfollow accounts that spike your anxiety or your envy. Maybe you cut out content that's mostly outrage disguised as awareness. Maybe you stop listening to podcasts all day and leave some silence. Maybe you stop checking messages every 5 minutes. These are not small changes. These are identity changes. Because your environment is your mind's diet, and clarity is a dietary outcome. Now let's connect this directly to Stoic practice. Epictetus taught that impressions hit you constantly, and your job is to examine them. But here's a modern twist. In a world of unlimited content, you are bombarding yourself with impressions at a volume the Stoics never had to face. You are feeding yourself hundreds, sometimes thousands of impressions per day. And then you wonder why your mind feels restless. It's like trying to keep a lake calm while you keep throwing stones into it. Reducing input is how you stop throwing stones. And the moment you do, something uncomfortable appears. Silence. Silence is where many people panic. Silence is where you feel the cravings. Silence is where you feel the unresolved emotions. Silence is where you hear your own doubts. That's why most people avoid it. But this is exactly why you need it. Because if you can't sit in silence, you can't hear your own judgment. And if you can't hear your own judgment, you'll keep borrowing judgments from the crowd. So here's the real habit. Schedule silence as a strategic advantage, not as a vibe. As a tool. 10 minutes of silence per day. No phone, no audio, no stimulation, just you and your mind. At first it feels boring, then it feels uncomfortable, then it starts to feel like power, because you begin to notice your own thoughts clearly. You notice what's actually bothering you. You notice what you've been avoiding. You notice what matters. That's clarity. Seneca would approve of this because he believed reflection is what turns experience into wisdom. Without reflection, experience is just events. With reflection, events become lessons. Silence gives you reflection. Now let's add one more practical element. Reduce the number of voices you consult before decisions. This is a big one. Many people are not unclear because they can't decide. They're unclear because they've outsourced their judgment to too many sources. They ask 10 friends, they watch 15 videos, they read 20 opinions. And each voice adds a new fear, a new angle, a new doubt. Then they feel responsible because they did research, but they're actually more confused than before. A Stoic would ask, what is your standard? What is your value? What is in your control? What kind of person do you want to be? Then they would decide based on that, not based on consensus. So a simple rule: for important decisions, choose at most 2 trusted sources and then return to your own judgment. You're not trying to be stubborn, you're trying to be clear. And here's an if-then that makes this habit actionable. If you notice mental fog, then reduce input for the next 2 hours. No new content, no new opinions, no new feeds. Just act on what you already know. Because fog is often not a lack of information. It's too much information. When you do this consistently, something changes in your personality. You become calmer, less reactive, harder to manipulate, more decisive, more present. You stop chasing the feeling of certainty that comes from endless research. And you start building the kind of certainty that comes from inner standards. And then you'll notice you speak differently too. You'll stop filling every silence. You'll stop needing to comment on everything. You'll start observing more, listening more, choosing words more carefully, which is exactly where the next habit takes us. Speak less, observe more, because clarity is not just what you think, it's also what you do with your mouth, your ego, and your need to be seen. Habit 5. Speak less. Observe more. Have you ever walked away from a conversation and felt that little sting of regret? Not because you said something evil, but because you said too much, too fast, too emotionally, like you were trying to protect your image in real time. And the more you talked, the less control you had. Most people don't realize how much mental fog is created by the mouth, by the need to explain, to defend, to impress, to fill silence, to prove you're right, to prove you belong. And in a world that rewards constant commentary, restraint starts to look like weakness, until you realize restraint is one of the clearest signs of inner strength. The Stoics treated speech as something sacred, not because they were quiet people by nature, but because they understood that words are not neutral. Words are commitments. Words shape identity. Words escalate conflict. Words reveal your inner state. And when you speak without restraint, you often give away your sovereignty before you even notice. Epictetus had a simple idea that cuts deep. You don't have to respond to every impression. You don't have to react to every provocation. You can let the moment pass through you without turning it into drama. And that principle doesn't only apply to thoughts, it applies to speech. The urge to speak is often just an impression, a pressure rising in the body, trying to push you into a reaction. If you can train yourself to pause before you speak, you can train yourself to stay clear under pressure. Marcus Aurelius lived in an environment where every word could have consequences. One careless sentence could create political enemies, cause fear, or make decisions harder. So he trained calmness not just in emotion, but in expression. He would remind himself not to be dragged into useless conflict, not to waste energy on noise, not to become the kind of person who needs to win the moment. That's the heart of this habit. You stop using conversation to win, and you start using conversation to see. Because the moment you speak less, you start noticing more. You notice tone. You notice what people avoid. You notice when their words and actions don't match. You notice patterns. You notice when you're being manipulated by guilt or urgency. You notice the subtle game underneath the surface conversation. And most importantly, you notice yourself, your triggers, your defensiveness, your hunger for validation. Speaking less is not just social strategy, it's self-knowledge. Now let's be honest, the reason many people talk too much is fear. Fear of silence, fear of being misunderstood, fear of seeming weak, fear of not being liked, fear of not being included, fear of losing control. So they over-explain. They justify decisions that don't need justification. They narrate their intentions, hoping it will protect them from criticism. They try to soften boundaries with extra words. They send long messages to people who never deserved an explanation in the first place. And it rarely works. Over-explaining doesn't earn respect. It often signals uncertainty. Seneca wrote that we often harm ourselves by speaking before thinking, by letting emotion lead the tongue, and by chasing approval through words. He understood that your dignity doesn't need to be proven, it needs to be protected. And one of the simplest ways to protect dignity is to reduce unnecessary speech. So what does speak less mean practically? It does not mean being cold. It does not mean being silent all the time. It means you remove the extra. You remove the defensive speeches. You remove the needless justification. You remove the emotional venting that turns into regret. You remove the habit of responding instantly. You remove the impulse to comment on everything. And when you remove the extra, you become sharper. Here's a simple way to practice this habit in real life. Let your first response be slower than your first emotion. If you're angry, you don't respond at the speed of anger. If you're excited, you don't promise at the speed of excitement. If you're offended, you don't attack at the speed of offense. You create a tiny delay, even a few seconds. That delay is where sovereignty lives. And in that delay, you ask one question: what is the purpose of my words right now? This is a Stoic question because it forces intention. Are you speaking to clarify, to solve, to support, to understand? Or are you speaking to punish, to prove, to impress, to defend your ego? Most people don't ask this. They just speak. And then they wonder why conversations leave them drained, why conflict escalates, why relationships feel unstable. It's because their words are being driven by impulse, not purpose. So practice speaking with purpose. If your words do not improve the moment, through truth, through calm, through clarity, consider silence, not as avoidance, as discipline. Now let's go deeper into observe more, because this is where your decision-making transforms. When you stop filling every silence, you start collecting data. You see how people respond when you don't chase them. You see who respects your boundaries when you don't over-explain them. You see who only likes you when you perform. You see who listens versus who waits for their turn to talk. You see who becomes aggressive when they can't control you with guilt. This observation gives you clarity, and clarity gives you power. Most people miss this because they're always talking, they're always revealing, they're always showing their hand, they're always trying to control the narrative. But the person who can be calm and quiet in conversation becomes hard to manipulate, because manipulation often relies on getting you to react quickly, to explain, to defend, to doubt yourself. When you observe more, you become strategic without being cruel. You start hearing what is not said. You start noticing patterns of respect and disrespect. You start recognizing emotional bait. You start seeing whether a relationship is built on mutual care or on control. And once you see these things, your decisions become cleaner. Who you trust, what you tolerate, where you invest your time. Now, an important warning: this habit is not about becoming mysterious or playing games. It's about reducing ego, because the ego loves to speak. It loves to announce. It loves to prove. It loves to be seen. And ego-driven speech is often what ruins relationships and opportunities. You say something to win the moment, and you lose the bigger picture. You correct someone publicly and create an enemy. You overpromise and become unreliable. You talk about your plans too early and drain your motivation. You vent and accidentally reveal weakness to someone who doesn't care. The Stoics would call this lack of self-control, not in a moralistic way, in a practical way. They would say, if your mouth is untrained, your life will be chaotic. So the training becomes simple and daily. Choose one conversation per day where your goal is to listen more than you speak. Ask better questions. Let the other person reveal themselves. Resist the urge to impress. Resist the urge to rescue. Resist the urge to fill silence. Just observe. And when you do speak, keep it clean. Shorter sentences, clear boundaries, fewer explanations, more calm. A powerful example is boundaries. Instead of saying, "I'm sorry, I just have a lot going on and I don't think I can, but maybe later," you say, "I can't do that." And then you stop. You let the silence sit. You let your boundary be real without decorating it. That's self-respect. And here's an if-then that makes it actionable. If you feel the urge to over-explain, then cut your message in half and send the shorter version. You'll be shocked how often the shorter version is the stronger one. Now, why does this transform you across a year? Because it changes your identity from reactive to composed. You stop leaking energy. You stop creating unnecessary conflict. You stop giving your time to pointless arguments. You stop trying to control how people see you. You become more comfortable with being misunderstood by the wrong people because you're no longer performing for everyone. And once you have that composure, the next habit becomes natural because you'll start seeing how much suffering comes not from what happens, but from resisting what happens, negotiating with reality, wishing it were different, arguing with facts. So next, we go to the Stoic habit that turns chaos into calm faster than almost anything except what you can't control immediately. Habit 6. Accept what you can't control immediately. Have you ever noticed how much of your exhaustion comes not from what happened, but from the part of you that keeps arguing with what happened? You get delayed and you replay the injustice. Someone disappoints you and you keep negotiating with the version of them you wish existed. A plan collapses and you mentally fight the fact that it collapsed. You lose something and a part of you keeps saying, "This shouldn't be happening." And that sentence, "this shouldn't be happening," sounds innocent, but it quietly drains your life because it turns reality into an enemy you're trying to defeat with thoughts. Stoicism calls this the refusal of what is. And the Stoic move is sharp and immediate. Accept what you can't control as soon as you can see it. Not because you like it, not because it's fair, not because you're pretending it doesn't hurt, but because resisting reality is the fastest way to waste your energy and lose clarity. Epictetus built his entire philosophy around one core distinction. Some things are up to you and some things are not. Your opinions, your choices, your effort, your character, that's yours. Other people's reactions, the past, outcomes, timing, luck, weather, the way the world behaves, that's not yours. And he was not gentle about what happens when you confuse these categories. When you try to control what you can't, you become anxious, resentful, manipulative, exhausted. When you refuse to control what you can, you become lazy, drifting, bitter. So acceptance is not weakness. Acceptance is correct classification. It's your mind saying, "This is outside my command. Therefore I will stop wasting my strength on it, and I will redirect my strength to what is mine." Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly because as emperor he had more power than almost anyone on earth, and still he couldn't control the most important things: plague, war, betrayal, illness, death, public opinion. And what you feel in his writing is a man repeatedly reminding himself not to demand that life be different, but to meet life as it is with reason and dignity. He would tell himself, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That is a form of acceptance so strong it turns obstacles into fuel, not because obstacles are good, but because they are real, and reality is what you work with. Now, what does accept immediately actually mean in your day-to-day life? It doesn't mean you don't feel emotion. It means you stop feeding the emotion with mental resistance. There's a difference between pain and resistance. Pain is the sting of the event. Resistance is the story that says, "This should not be happening to me." Pain might be unavoidable. Resistance is optional, and resistance often lasts longer than the pain itself. Resistance keeps the wound open. Seneca wrote about how much suffering comes from our judgments and our anticipation, and one of the most practical interpretations of that is this: you don't just suffer the event, you suffer the argument with the event. You suffer the replay, you suffer the fantasy of how it should have gone, you suffer the desire to punish reality for not cooperating. So the habit is to drop the argument early. The moment you recognize something is out of your control, you label it, accept it, and move your mind to response. Not later, now. Because if you wait, your mind will build a whole emotional city around the problem. And once it does, your decision-making gets distorted. You'll send the wrong message. You'll say the harsh thing. You'll make the impulsive purchase. You'll sabotage the day out of frustration. You'll treat people badly because you're angry at the universe. Acceptance protects you from becoming someone you don't respect. So here's a simple internal script you can use. When something happens that you can't control, say, "Okay, this is here." That's it. Not, "I'm fine." Not, "Everything is great." Just, "This is here." Then ask the Stoic follow-up. What is mine to do now? That question is like a knife that cuts through emotional fog. It forces you out of complaint and into agency. It forces you out of passive suffering and into active character. It reminds you that you always have a move. Not always a move you like, but a move. And that's the real reason acceptance creates calm. It restores movement. People feel trapped when they're resisting reality because resistance produces no progress. It's just friction. Acceptance restores motion because once you stop arguing with what is, you can work with what is. Now, you might be thinking, but if I accept, won't I become passive? Won't I tolerate injustice? Won't I let people walk over me? No, that's a misunderstanding. Acceptance is not approval. Acceptance is acknowledgement. It's recognizing the fact of what is true so you can respond wisely. If someone treats you badly, acceptance doesn't mean you stay. Acceptance means you see them clearly. You stop hoping they'll suddenly become someone else, and you act accordingly. set boundaries, leave, speak directly, stop investing. In fact, acceptance often makes you more decisive because you stop bargaining with fantasies. So in relationships, acceptance is powerful. It looks like this. You stop trying to extract empathy from someone who has consistently shown you they don't have it. You stop pleading for consistency from someone who thrives on chaos. You stop explaining your boundaries to someone who benefits from violating them. You stop hoping that love will fix patterns. You accept what they are showing you, and then you choose your response with self-respect. That is stoic strength. In work and goals, acceptance looks like refusing to waste energy on what you can't change, market conditions, delays, other people's moods. You accept constraints. Then you focus on effort and strategy. That's why Stoicism is so compatible with excellence. It doesn't ask you to lower standards. It asks you to lower emotional waste. Now, let's talk about the hardest place to practice this, the past. The past is the ultimate uncontrollable, and many people spend their lives mentally trying to renegotiate it. If only I should have. Why did I? This is poison to clarity because it keeps your mind living in an imaginary courtroom where the verdict never ends. The Stoic move is to accept the past as facts, then use it as instruction. Regret can either become punishment or wisdom. Acceptance turns it into wisdom. So a practical way to do this is, when you catch yourself replaying the past, ask, what is the lesson and what is the next action? Take the lesson. Leave the self-attack. Move forward. That is acceptance in motion. And here's the if-then that makes this habit usable on a bad day. If you catch yourself complaining internally about something you can't control, then immediately name one thing you can control and do it. It could be as small as taking one breath, drinking water, sending one message, doing one task, stepping outside for 2 minutes. The point isn't the action itself. The point is shifting your mind back into agency. Because agency is the antidote to helplessness. Over time, this habit transforms you in a way that people can feel. You become less dramatic, less reactive, harder to shake. You stop making every inconvenience personal. You stop wasting your strength on fights you can't win. You start moving through life with a kind of calm authority because you're no longer emotionally negotiating with reality. And once you have that acceptance, something else becomes clear. Your life will only become as strong as your ability to keep promises to yourself. Because acceptance gives you peace, but promises give you power. The next habit is about that internal contract. The small promises, the daily ones, the ones nobody sees. Because self-respect is built there first, and everything else follows. Habit 7. Keep promises to yourself, especially small ones. Have you ever said you were going to change, really meant it, and then watched yourself break that promise again and felt that quiet disappointment that doesn't show up as tears or drama, but as something heavier? Like you lost a little respect for your own word. That feeling matters more than most people realize, because confidence isn't just a personality trait. It's evidence, and the strongest evidence you can have is this simple thing. When you say you'll do something, you do it. Not for applause, not to prove anything to the world, to prove something to yourself. This is where Stoicism becomes very practical. The Stoics didn't chase motivation. They trained reliability. They understood that the mind becomes stable when it can trust its own commitments. And when the mind can trust itself, decisions become clean because you stop bargaining with your own standards. Epictetus would say that freedom is found in what is up to you, your choices, your actions, your judgments. Keeping promises to yourself is a direct act of owning what is up to you. It's you saying, I will not be ruled by impulse. I will be ruled by my chosen principles. That's not self-help. That's sovereignty. And Marcus Aurelius, again writing privately to himself, kept returning to the same theme. Do the work in front of you. Live according to your nature as a rational being. Don't drift, don't complain, don't betray your own standards. When you read him, you can feel that he's not trying to feel inspired. He's trying to become someone he can rely on when life gets hard. Because life will get hard. And in hard seasons, the only thing that saves you is character. Promises to yourself are the bricks of character. Now, let's be honest about why people struggle with this habit. It's not because they're lazy, it's because they make promises that are too big, too vague, too emotional, and then they break them, and each break becomes a small wound. I'll wake up at 5 a.m. every day. I'll never eat junk again. I'll fix my whole life this month. Those promises sound powerful in the moment, especially when you're frustrated, but they're not built for real life. They're built for fantasy. The Stoic way is different. Smaller promises kept consistently, because a small promise kept is worth more than a big promise broken. Seneca talked about the danger of trying to change everything at once, and the subtle waste that comes from dramatic resolutions that don't survive ordinary stress. The mind loves the feeling of a fresh start. But the body lives in habits, and habits are built by repetition, not excitement. So the habit here is not be intense, it's be trustworthy. And there's something deeply healing about that, because many people live with an internal split. They want one life, but they behave like another person. They have standards in their mind, but their actions don't match. That mismatch creates anxiety. It creates shame. It creates confusion. It creates the sense that you don't know who you are, because who you are is always changing based on mood. Keeping promises to yourself closes that split. It aligns you. It makes you feel whole. So what does a small promise look like? It's a promise you can keep even on a bad day. Not a perfect day, a bad day. A small promise might be, I will walk for 10 minutes. I will write 1 paragraph. I will do 5 push-ups. I will drink water before coffee. I will read 1 page. I will not check my phone for the first 30 minutes. I will go to bed at the same time tonight. I will do 1 difficult task before noon. I will tell the truth in 1 conversation. These are not glamorous, but they are powerful because they build the one thing most people are missing: internal trust. And internal trust changes everything. Because when you trust yourself, you stop needing constant external validation. You stop needing someone to rescue your motivation. You stop needing a perfect environment. You start moving with quiet confidence. Because your mind knows you won't abandon yourself at the first moment of discomfort. Here's a key Stoic insight that makes this habit sharper. The world learns how to treat you based on how you treat yourself. If you break promises to yourself, you train yourself to believe you don't deserve consistency. You train yourself to accept broken standards, and that leaks into everything: relationships, work, health, boundaries. But when you keep promises to yourself, you start carrying yourself differently. You speak differently. You say no more easily. You tolerate less nonsense. You respect your own time. You become harder to manipulate, because manipulation often works by pulling you off your standards. So how do you actually build this habit in 2026 without turning it into another thing you fail at? You follow a Stoic rule. Choose a promise that is small enough to be inevitable, not small enough to be easy, small enough to be doable. Then you attach it to a trigger you already have. This matters. Habits stick when they have a stable anchor. So you might say, after I brush my teeth, I stretch for 2 minutes. After I make coffee, I write 1 sentence. After I shut down work, I walk for 10 minutes. Before I open social media, I do 1 hard task. You're not relying on inspiration. You're building a system. Marcus Aurelius would respect this because he believed in doing what is necessary in the moment, not what feels good. But he also understood the power of repetition. Your life is the sum of what you do repeatedly, not what you intend occasionally. Now, let's talk about the emotional part, because this is where people fall apart. Missing a day. Most people treat a missed day like proof they're doomed. They collapse into shame. They say, "See, I'm not disciplined." Then they abandon the habit entirely. That's not stoic. That's fragile. The stoic approach is simple. You miss a day, you return the next day with no drama, no self-attack, no emotional punishment. You just return. Because the goal is not perfection. The goal is identity. And identity is built by returning. Seneca would call this progress, steady correction, not theatrical guilt. The ability to notice failure, learn and resume, that is strength. So here's an if-then that turns this into a real practice. If you miss a promise, then the next day you do the smallest version immediately, not later. Immediately. Because the danger is not missing once. The danger is letting the miss become a story. I always fail. You kill that story with a quick return. Now, there's another layer to promises to yourself that changes your entire year. The promise of restraint. Most people think promises are about doing more, but some of the most powerful promises are about not doing something, not checking your phone during meals, not gossiping, not responding emotionally, not drinking on weekdays, not staying in conversations that disrespect you, not watching content that poisons your mood. These are promises of self-control. They build dignity. Epictetus would say, this is where freedom lives, when your impulses don't command you, when you can feel the urge and still choose differently. And every time you keep a restraint promise, you prove to yourself that your mind is not a slave to craving. Over a year, this compounds into something that feels like transformation. Not because you became a different person overnight, but because you became someone whose word means something, even when nobody is watching. And that brings us naturally to the next habit, because once you start keeping promises, you start needing reflection to refine them. You need a way to review your day without turning it into self-hatred, to correct without crushing yourself. That's where the next stoic habit enters. Review the day without self-attack, because a strong man doesn't need to punish himself to improve. He just needs the honesty to see clearly and the calm to adjust. Habit 8. Review the day without self-attack. Have you ever laid down at night and felt your mind immediately start replaying the day like a courtroom, dragging out your mistakes, your awkward moments, the thing you should have said, the thing you shouldn't have done? And instead of learning, you just end up punished? That loop is one of the most common ways people lose momentum. They think they're being honest with themselves, but what they're really doing is attacking themselves. And self-attack doesn't create growth. It creates fear. It creates avoidance. It creates that heavy feeling where you don't even want to try tomorrow, because you already feel guilty for today. The Stoics had a different approach. They believed in reflection, but not in cruelty. They believed in self-examination, but not in self-destruction. They treated the mind like something you train, not something you beat into obedience. Seneca is the most direct example here, because he wrote about a practice that is almost shockingly practical. At the end of the day, he would review himself. He would ask what he did well, where he failed, what he could correct. And the point wasn't to shame himself. The point was to make tomorrow cleaner. This is what strong people do. They don't avoid reality, and they also don't drown in it. They look, they learn, they adjust. So the habit is simple. Every night you review the day, but you do it like a coach, not like an enemy. Because if you review like an enemy, you will eventually start lying to yourself, or you'll start numbing. You'll avoid the truth because the truth hurts too much. But if you review like a coach, you can face anything. You can admit mistakes without collapsing. You can see patterns without spiraling. You can recognize progress without needing perfection. And that's the real purpose of this habit, to turn experience into wisdom. Without review, the day just happens. You repeat the same mistakes because you never notice them clearly. You drift because nothing is captured. You feel busy, but not better. Reflection turns random days into a path. Marcus Aurelius did this in his own way. His meditations are not a book of advice. They're a nightly return, a man looking at his own mind, correcting it, reminding it of what matters, bringing it back to reason. He wasn't writing to impress anyone. He was writing to stay aligned. That is the spirit you want in 2026. Private honesty, clean correction, no drama. Now, let's talk about what without self-attack actually means, because it's easy to misunderstand. Self-attack sounds like, I'm pathetic. I always mess up. I'll never change. I'm behind. I'm weak. Those statements feel like truth when you're tired, but they're not truth. They're global verdicts. They don't lead to improvement. They lead to paralysis. A Stoic review is different. It uses specific language. It focuses on behavior, not identity. It says, I lost my temper at that moment. I avoided that task. I scrolled longer than I meant to. I spoke from ego. I didn't keep my promise. These are facts. Facts can be corrected. Identity verdicts cannot. So the first rule of Stoic review is, talk to yourself in facts and behaviors, not in labels. The second rule is, keep it short enough that you'll actually do it. Most people fail at reflection because they turn it into a long journaling performance. They write pages, they analyze, they spiral, and then they stop. Your review should be like brushing your teeth. Simple, repeatable, non-negotiable. 5 minutes is enough. Even 2 minutes can change your life if you do it daily. Here's a clean structure that fits Stoicism perfectly because it's simple and it creates action. You ask 3 questions. What did I do well today? This matters because a mind that never acknowledges progress becomes bitter. It becomes hopeless. It starts believing nothing changes. And that belief is dangerous. So you name one thing, just one, where you showed discipline, patience, courage, focus, honesty, restraint. It could be small. You resisted an impulse. You did your workout. You made the call. You stayed calm. You didn't over-explain. You said no. You showed up. You kept a promise. You name it, and you let it count. Not for ego, for evidence. Then you ask, where did I fall short today? Not, why am I like this? Just, where did I fall short? Again, specific. Maybe you reacted too fast. Maybe you wasted time. Maybe you avoided discomfort. Maybe you said yes when you meant no. Maybe you were passive. Maybe you were harsh. You name it without excuses and without cruelty. This is where strength shows up, being able to look at your own mistakes without collapsing. Then the third question is the most important. What is the correction for tomorrow? 1 correction, not 10. A correction might be, tomorrow when I feel that trigger, I pause before speaking. Or, tomorrow I start with my intention before I touch my phone. Or, tomorrow I do the hard task first. Or, tomorrow I keep my promise even if it's small. This is where reflection becomes transformation. Because you don't just review, you refine. That's it. Now, why does this create clarity? Because it removes the fog of self-deception. Many people live in a strange mental haze where they don't know why they feel the way they feel. They just feel anxious, guilty, restless. Review makes the invisible visible. It shows you patterns. You start seeing that your anxiety spikes after too much scrolling. You start seeing that your anger spikes when you don't sleep. You start seeing that your low confidence comes from broken promises. You start seeing that your mood improves when you train. You start seeing that your peace improves when you stop over-explaining. These patterns are gold because once you see them, you can change them. Epictetus would call this self-knowledge, and he would say it's impossible to live well without it, because if you don't know your own weaknesses, your weaknesses will govern you. Now, there's a quiet emotional layer to this habit that most people miss. Reviewing the day without self-attack heals your relationship with yourself. A lot of people carry an internal parent that is harsh, disappointed, never satisfied. They grew up with criticism, or they learned to motivate themselves through pressure, and now they live with that voice constantly. The problem is, that voice may create short bursts of productivity, but it destroys long-term stability. It makes you dread your own mind. It makes you avoid reflection. It makes you numb. And numbness is the death of clarity. So this habit isn't only about improvement. It's about becoming someone you can live with, someone you can trust, someone who can fail without collapsing and succeed without arrogance. That balance is stoic strength. And here's an if-then to make this habit stick on nights when you're tired. If you don't have energy for a full review, then answer only one question. What is one thing I will do better tomorrow? That's enough. Because consistency is more important than completeness. Over weeks, this habit compounds in a way that feels almost unfair. Your days become cleaner, your mistakes get smaller, your self-trust grows, your decision-making improves because you're no longer repeating blind patterns. You're training your mind with feedback, the way athletes train their bodies. And once you're reviewing like this, you naturally start detaching from outcomes, because you stop judging yourself by whether the day looked perfect, and you start judging yourself by whether you stayed aligned with the process. Which is exactly what the next habit is about. Detach from outcomes. Commit to process. Because freedom comes when your standards are internal and your effort is consistent, regardless of applause or results. Habit 9. Detach from outcomes. Commit to process. Have you ever done something good, something disciplined, something brave, and still felt unsettled because the result didn't come fast enough, or the applause didn't come at all, or the outcome didn't match the effort the way you thought it should? That frustration is one of the most subtle traps in self-improvement because it convinces you that the work wasn't worth it. It makes you start bargaining. It makes you start chasing shortcuts. It makes you start measuring your life by signals you don't fully control. And Stoicism steps in here with a kind of calm severity that can change your entire year. You are not entitled to outcomes. You are responsible for your process. That's not pessimism. That's freedom. Epictetus would say your power is in your choices, not in what the world returns to you. You can choose your effort. You can choose your attitude. You can choose your integrity, but you cannot choose the applause. You cannot choose the timing. You cannot choose other people's reactions. You cannot choose luck. So when you attach your peace to outcomes, you attach your peace to things you don't command. And the result is anxiety. Because anxiety is what happens when you try to control what can't be controlled. Marcus Aurelius wrote variations of this reminder again and again, because even as emperor, he couldn't control the most important outcomes. He could command armies and still lose battles. He could govern and still be misunderstood. He could try to do good and still be criticized. So he trained himself to return to a simpler standard. Do the right work in the right way and accept what follows. That is the mindset of process. Now, this habit matters in 2026 more than ever because modern life teaches you to live on feedback, likes, views, money, approval, quick progress, instant validation. You start thinking, if it doesn't get recognized, it doesn't count. And slowly, you become dependent. You become emotionally addicted to results. You stop doing what is right, and you start doing what is rewarded. Stoicism breaks that addiction. It teaches you to live by internal standards, because internal standards are stable, external rewards are not. So what does it mean to detach from outcomes? It doesn't mean you don't care about results. It means you don't let results own you. It means you don't let a good outcome inflate your ego. It means you don't let a bad outcome destroy your discipline. It means you stay steady. You stay committed to the process that makes you better, even when results are delayed, even when people don't notice, even when the world feels indifferent. Seneca warned about how we give our peace away by tying it to things outside us: status, wealth, praise, the opinions of the crowd. He saw how quickly those things can disappear and how fragile a man becomes when his emotional stability depends on them. Process-based living is how you stop being fragile, because you stop placing your soul on unstable ground. Now let's bring this to real life, because this habit is the difference between people who transform and people who try and quit. Think about fitness. If you train only when the scale moves, you'll quit when it stalls. If you train only when you feel motivated, you'll quit when motivation dips. But if you commit to the process, showing up, training consistently, eating simply, then your identity becomes stable and results follow as a side effect. Think about career. If you work only when someone praises you, you'll collapse when you're ignored. But if you commit to process, skill building, deep work, consistent output, then your value grows regardless of immediate recognition. Think about relationships. If you act with integrity only when the other person responds perfectly, you'll become reactive and resentful. But if you commit to process, clear boundaries, honest communication, consistent respect, then you become stable. And stability either improves the relationship or reveals that it's not worth your investment. In every domain, outcome attachment makes you emotional. Process commitment makes you powerful. But there's another layer here that's even more personal. Outcome attachment often reveals an unspoken need to control how you feel. People chase outcomes because they want a guaranteed emotional reward. They want certainty that they won't be disappointed. They want proof they're worthy. They want the world to confirm that their effort meant something. The Stoic approach is to remove that dependency, to say, my effort means something because I chose it. That is dignity. And dignity changes how you move through the world. You stop begging life for permission to feel proud. You stop begging people to validate your progress. You stop needing constant reassurance. You start measuring yourself by your own standards. So let's make it practical with a daily method. At the start of the day, you choose one process goal, not an outcome goal, not make $1,000 today, but do 2 hours of focused work, not get everyone to like me, but speak honestly and calmly. Not lose 2 pounds, but train and eat my simple meal. Not go viral, but publish the next piece. You choose a process you control. Then you do it. Then you let the outcome be whatever it is. This is the Stoic secret for reducing anxiety. Replace outcome goals with process goals, because anxiety lives where control is uncertain. Process lives where control is real. And the more you live in process, the clearer your mind becomes. Your mind stops being whipped around by every result. You stop overreacting to wins and losses. You stop making desperate decisions to force outcomes. You stop checking the scoreboard every 5 minutes. You become steady. Now, there's a very important subtlety here. Detaching from outcomes does not mean becoming passive. It means becoming consistent. It means you still care about excellence. You still improve your strategy. You still learn. You still adapt. But you don't let your emotional stability depend on whether the world rewards you immediately. Marcus Aurelius would call this doing your duty without resentment. Epictetus would call this acting according to nature, using reason to choose the right action. Seneca would call this freedom from external chains. Different language, same inner posture. I will do my part with honor, and I will let the rest be the rest. So here's an if-then that makes this habit real when your emotions flare. If you catch yourself obsessing over results, then immediately return to the next process step. Ask, what is the next small action I can take? Do that. The obsession will weaken because obsession is often just energy with nowhere to go. And over a year, this changes you quietly and completely. You become someone who can endure slow progress. You become someone who can keep going without applause. You become someone who doesn't collapse after setbacks. You become someone whose confidence comes from work, not from outcomes. And once you live like this, the final habit becomes natural, because when you detach from outcomes, you start seeing time differently. You start realizing life is short and that trivial worries steal your years. That's why the Stoics kept one reminder close: not to panic, not to become dark, but to become awake. Remember mortality, lightly but clearly. Habit 10. Remember mortality, lightly but clearly. Have you ever had a moment, maybe in the middle of a normal day, where something small suddenly hits you and you realize, in a calm but unsettling way, that time is moving faster than you think, and that so many of your worries are not actually worthy of your life? That is the final Stoic habit, and it's the one that quietly powers all the others. Remember mortality, lightly but clearly. Not to become gloomy, not to panic, not to obsess over death, but to wake up. Because nothing clears the mind like remembering that your days are numbered. The Stoics had a name for this practice. Later traditions called it memento mori. Remember you will die. But the Stoics didn't use it as a horror story. They used it as a truth that burns away nonsense. It was their way of staying aligned with what matters when ego and distraction tried to take over. Marcus Aurelius returned to this constantly. He would remind himself that emperors and slaves die the same way, that praise fades, that conflict dissolves, that the body returns to dust. And he didn't write that to depress himself. He wrote it to humble himself, to focus himself, to stop wasting his mind on what is trivial. He was training urgency without panic. Because there are two kinds of urgency. There is anxious urgency, the kind that makes you frantic, reactive, desperate. And there is clear urgency, the kind that makes you honest, decisive, and awake. This habit gives you clear urgency. Seneca wrote about time more than almost any Stoic. He warned that people guard their money but spend their life as if it's endless. They get angry at small inconveniences, they chase status, they procrastinate important work, they postpone love, they postpone health, they postpone courage, as if tomorrow is guaranteed. His point was not, be afraid. His point was, don't be asleep. And Epictetus, from a different angle, would say, if you understand what you are, mortal, temporary, limited, then you stop demanding that life be perfect. You stop treating every discomfort like an injustice. You stop being shocked when things change. Mortality makes you realistic, and realism makes you calm. So what does remember mortality lightly actually mean in practice? It means you carry the awareness as a gentle compass, not as a heavy burden. It means you ask simple questions that sharpen your choices. Is this worth my time? Will this matter in a year? Is this the kind of thing I want to be thinking about on my last day? Am I living like my time is valuable, or like it's unlimited? These questions don't make life smaller, they make life clearer. Because when you remember mortality, you stop negotiating with trivial fears. You stop arguing with strangers online. You stop staying in conversations that drain your spirit. You stop tolerating disrespect to avoid discomfort. You stop postponing the work that would change your life. You stop waiting for the perfect moment to begin. Mortality turns one day into today. And that shift is transformation. Now, there's a common misunderstanding here. People think thinking about death will make them anxious. But for many people, the opposite is true. When done correctly, it reduces anxiety. Because a lot of anxiety is created by trying to control life as if you're immortal. You worry about tiny imperfections. You fear looking foolish. You fear being disliked. You fear the wrong choice. As if every moment is a permanent verdict, mortality breaks that illusion. It reminds you that you're a human being passing through a brief window of time, and that your job is not to be perfect. Your job is to be honest and courageous with the time you have. Marcus Aurelius would say, you could leave life right now, so let that determine what you do and say and think. Again, not as drama, but as clarity. If you really believed that, you would stop wasting your day on resentment. You would stop repeating the same self-sabotage. You would stop chasing approval from people you don't even respect. You would stop making your life a performance. You would begin living. So how do you install this habit without becoming morbid? You make it small, regular, and practical. One simple ritual. Every morning, take 10 seconds and remember, this day is not guaranteed. Then immediately ask, what would make today meaningful? Not impressive, meaningful. That question will guide you toward the essential. Health, relationships, work that matters, courage, honesty, presence. Another ritual. When you feel pulled into trivial drama, pause and ask, would I care about this on my last day? If the answer is no, let it go faster. This habit alone can remove so much unnecessary suffering. And there's a third ritual that's powerful, gratitude through impermanence. When you remember that everything is temporary, you start appreciating what you usually ignore. A quiet meal, a friend's voice, a healthy body, a peaceful morning, even the ability to try again. Mortality, used correctly, makes you grateful without needing life to be perfect. Now here's the deeper Stoic truth. Remembering mortality is also remembering responsibility. Because if your time is limited, then every choice is a vote for what you become. You don't have infinite days to build character. You don't have infinite days to repair relationships. You don't have infinite days to stop wasting your attention. You don't have infinite days to become who you know you could be. So mortality makes discipline feel less like punishment and more like respect. You stop seeing habits as restrictions and start seeing them as the shape of a meaningful life. This is why the habit is last, because it ties everything together. Control the first thought, because your mind is your life. Set one intention, because your days are limited. Practice voluntary discomfort, because comfort can steal years. Reduce input, because attention is precious. Speak less, observe more, because time wasted in ego is time you don't get back. Accept what you can't control, because fighting reality wastes life. Keep promises to yourself, because you don't have time to keep betraying yourself. Review the day, because learning compounds. Commit to process, because outcomes are uncertain, but effort is yours. And remember mortality, because the clock is real, and that's exactly why your life can be beautiful. So let's close this in a way that honors what transformation actually is. You don't need to adopt all 10 habits tomorrow. That's not stoicism. That's another form of ego, trying to become perfect instantly. Real change is quieter. It's earned. It's built through small, non-negotiable choices that compound when nobody is watching. So pick one habit, the one you resist the most, and adopt it for the next 7 days. Just 7 days. Not as a challenge to impress yourself, but as a simple experiment in self-respect. Then, when discipline fades, because it will, return to the episode, return to the habits, return to the standard. And as you go into 2026, keep one calm truth close. Your life will not be transformed by a loud moment. It will be transformed by the quiet way you live on ordinary days. And maybe that's the whole secret. Have you ever noticed how the mind secretly loves the idea of transformation, but resists the reality of it? Because the reality is almost always quiet, almost always unglamorous, almost always made of small choices that nobody claps for. That's the point I want to leave you with. If 2026 becomes your year, it probably won't be because you found a new identity to announce, or a new plan to show off, or a dramatic turning point that looks good from the outside. It will be because you chose a simpler life on the inside. A life where your first thought doesn't own you, where your morning has direction, where you're no longer afraid of small discomfort, where you reduce noise instead of drowning in it, where you speak with restraint and listen with presence, where you stop negotiating with reality and start responding to it, where your word to yourself becomes something you can trust, where you review your days with honesty instead of self-hatred, where you commit to the process even when outcomes are slow, and where you remember, lightly but clearly, that your time is real. And what's beautiful about these habits is that they don't require a perfect life. They work in a messy life. They work on hard days. They work when you're tired. They work when nobody is watching. In fact, they work best there, because that's where character is built. So, here's a quiet invitation as you leave this episode. Don't try to take all 10. Your mind will turn that into pressure, and pressure turns into avoidance. Instead, choose one habit, the one that made you feel a little exposed, a little resistant, the one your brain wanted to argue with. Choose that one, because that resistance is often the exact place your freedom is hiding. And for the next week, treat it as non-negotiable, but treat yourself with calmness as you practice it, because Stoicism was never meant to be self-violence. It was meant to be self-governance. And when you slip, and you will, don't turn it into a story about who you are. Just return. Return the way a strong person returns, without drama, without self-attack, with a simple correction and a steady breath. That returning is the real habit behind all habits. Before you go, take a second and ask yourself one honest question. Which of these habits do I resist the most? And what does that say about what I've been avoiding? Hold that question. Let it sit with you. Let it follow you into your next decision. And if you ever feel your discipline fading later this year, come back to this episode, not to feel inspired, but to remember the standard again, because clarity isn't something you find once. It's something you practice until it becomes the way you live. And maybe the most powerful version of you in 2026 won't be louder. Maybe he'll just be steadier,